Hey, welcome back to The Good, the Bad, and the Techy, a podcast all about leading edge tech. I'm GigaOM CTO Howard Holton, and this week we'll try to cut through the jargon and give you what you need to make sense of it all. In this case being the recent Cloudstrike outage. Hello, everyone.
Now,
you may notice it's a little different this week than normal. My British co-host is now sporting a mohawk and a different accent.
Jon Collins, your normal co-host, was unavailable this morning, but we felt this was a really important topic, so you grabbed the closest John you could find, which was me. Hello, everyone. I'm the content production manager here at GigaOM, and I'm usually here, but behind the scenes. So it's strange to be in front of the camera today. Howard, it seems like there was a little bit of big news this last week.
A little bit. It's fairly rare in IT that we have an outage of the scale that we did last week. Right. It's also rare that we have an outage that's kind of perpetuated in the way that outage occurred. The sad thing is the kind of reason behind the outage almost feels like it's becoming the story of our people, right? When you look at like the major cloud outages, we pretty much always hear, oh, someone updated a major routing table that propagated and took down a region or took down a cloud provider or took down some major service. And in this case, you could say the reason that happened is somewhat similar. Generally, when those things happened, it's because they're not properly tested in a development or test environment to ensure that the rollout is correct, that the rollout is bug-free, that the rollout is suitable for production. The sad part here is that's exactly what happened with Cloudstrike. They pushed out a definition update to their endpoint detection and response tool, Falcon, that caused a blue screen of death for all the Windows hosts that it was deployed on.
So I don't, full disclosure, my knowledge of tech stuff is kind of limited to what I see and hear from Howard in my role as production guy. Why was this so big? What is Falcon and why was it everywhere and like on every airline except for Southwest apparently?
Yes, well, as Southwest made a joke, right? They're running their whole system on Commodore 64.
Commodore 60. I did. So yeah. That's my other knowledge of tech comes from memes. So
I love that Southwest took a moment to kind of jump into the, hey, like our stack is old, ha ha ha. We're famous for our stack being old, ha ha ha, kind of thing. So first, let's take a look at what EDR is, endpoint detection and response. So EDR is what we used to call antivirus software is basically what EDR is. So it's a fundamental piece of security software deployed on every workstation in the world effectively. Whether you choose Cloudstrike or someone else, you should have some form of antivirus or EDR deployed in your machine. By default, Windows machines have the free version of Microsoft Defender, as an example, right? There are probably 60 to 100 kind of endpoint protection, antivirus, EDR vendors when you take that whole market as a group. That doesn't mean there's 60 to 100 that are like truly competitive at an enterprise level, but that's the scale of the space. Cloudstrike is, at least before last week, the recognized leader in the space. Their Falcon platform is a great platform. I've used it before. The trick here is in order to protect the endpoints properly, certainly for the Windows operating system, they need to operate at the kernel level, right? Okay. And what that means is if you think of the kernel as the engine of your car, right? They're the wrapper around that engine so that anything that interacts with the engine, like the transmission, the fuel system, the air intake, all has to go through that wrapper, so that that wrapper can say, is this valid traffic? Is this happening at the rate we expect it to happen at? And is it carrying anything bad? Right? Think of it like a fuel filter would be an okay way to kind of think about it.
Essentially a filter.
Yes. Yes. And it's a very effective, very good filter that does its job really, really well. So here's the trick. In the same way you have maintenance on your car and you change out your fuel filter, you change out the definitions, right? The things that tool looks for, the behavior that it looks for on a nearly constant basis. As soon as there's a new security attack, a new cyber attack, new definitions are released as quickly as we can find a way to detect and remediate, sometimes just detect, but detect and remediate that problem, right? Because again, prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Mm-hmm. And so what effectively happened was CrowdStrike shipped a definition to their 24,000 customers that replaced the fuel filter with a fuel filter that not only didn't filter fuel, but didn't pass traffic. And instead of everything kind of operating or operating partially, what it did was it starved the engine and the engine crashed.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think so. I'm trying to work with the car analogy, but unfortunately, I know less about cars than I do about tech. Was the definition they pushed too broad? Was it too?
No,
was it just written poorly? Like what exactly happened that caused that?
And it appears they didn't test it before they pushed it. And generally, the way that happens is someone finds a flaw, makes a last-minute change, and rolls it out to production without rolling it out to test first. Right? There is a lot of pressure on pushing security updates as fast as possible.
Right.
Right? They're defending against attacks that are currently in the wild or expected to be in the wild. Like, what I don't know is the purpose of these definitions. Like, if there was an update where CrowdStrike was seeing some malicious traffic and needed to block the malicious traffic as quickly as possible, and that was their motivation for pushing fast and kind of skipping process, or they don't have proper process, or they don't have proper checks and balances, and it's never really been them before. There's an infinite number of reasons for this to happen. However, the thing to note is it affected every Windows host. The effect was, if not instantaneous, near enough that it shows an absolute lack of anything close to thorough testing.
Right. Because even the basic testing would have caught it because it was so... Right.
Right. Because it was so emphatic in its response.
So right? I guess, and 1 second, speaking of instantaneous response, speak of the devil and he shall appear. John, thanks for joining us.
Hey.
Let me, Howard already said, hey, you're clear for that. I guess my first question then is my understanding of DevOps and things like Kubernetes and cloud deployment is that part of what you can do is start deploying during testing and bug hunting and that sort of thing. But obviously my understanding is flawed because this shows, right?
Well, let's kind of break down the danger of what CrowdStrike did. And it should now be apparent to everyone. However, again, in order for these tools to work, they have to kind of live and operate at the most fundamental level of the operating system, right? Most of the software that we deploy doesn't touch anything remotely close to that, right? So for most of what we do, the blast radius or the risk of failure is lower than where CrowdStrike lives. Right? So if I make a patch to my payment processor, and this is going to be a high impact response, and I screw it up, I could very easily create a system whereby I don't close the transaction processing and I process the transaction over and over and over again until the account is maxed out, some third-party failure occurs that then breaks the system, right? By which point I've charged a customer 10,000 times for a $10 thing, as an example, right? Still doesn't crash my system, but it's a bug, it causes a problem. I may deploy that once inside my organization. I may deploy it to all my customers, and I take down their credit card processing. The rest of their system works fine. The number of cards they process is anywhere from 1/30th to 1/365th of their customer base, if they're any kind of SaaS service, right? Just logically, I'm likely to process 1/30th of my transactions every day if I bill monthly, 1/365th of my transactions if I bill annually. Like, this is not a SaaS billing podcast, so the math is close enough. So while that would be a huge impact, while that would be damaging for me as a company and my reputation, I don't take down every Windows machine in the world, right? Or every Windows machine that I service. So also, that should have been caught in testing because that's pretty blatant. But nonetheless, there are ways to conceive of where, maybe I didn't process Amex cards with a particular prefix that slipped through my testing, or some strange thing like that, right? Again, the challenge here is because of the way these things operate, also because of the speed of response that I need to definitions, I simply cannot skip those steps as Cloudstrike or any other EDR vendor. This could have happened to anyone else in theory, right? Here's the next challenge, because on Sunday, I put a post on LinkedIn expressing my frustration for people blaming Microsoft. This was not a Microsoft problem. I think I called out 7-ish reasons why it's not a Microsoft problem, but let's start from the top, right? First, yes, this affected Microsoft, not Mac OS, not Linux. The three platforms operate differently. There's no way that the single push would have affected all three. Could have affected any one of the three based on a flaw that could have caused a kernel panic in Mac and Linux, or the kernel panic that was caused in Windows. However, both Mac and Linux have tighter control of their kernel than Microsoft does. That sounds ridiculous until you realize Windows has been fundamentally used by business since, the late 80s. Business is really bad about updating their applications. And every time Microsoft has attempted to do large changes within the kernel, their customers have said, no. We need to maintain application compatibility for 30 years, putting Microsoft in a bind that Mac does not face. Their enterprise platform's non-existent. And Linux doesn't face because there is no centralization for Linux.
Yeah, it's one of those things.
There's no centralization for Linux. It is open source at its core. So if at any point you don't like what's happening in the Linux kernel, it gets forked. And you can generally find a fork that you like and eat with that one. Right? So the lack of standardization within Linux is a strength and a weakness, but also means it's not the same thing. Right? Microsoft has to maintain that backwards compatibility. So that's kind of piece one. And the world has forced that on them, not the other way around. Microsoft in 2008 released a kernel that is the largest fundamental change that Microsoft was ever able to make work. And I'll be honest, it's wizardry. And I'm going to call out Mark Brzezinowicz because he took over that team that enabled this to happen. It's wizardry that they were able to make such amazing security changes and maintain the high level of backwards compatibility that they did in making the changes they did in 2008. But they kind of pushed the limit on what the market would allow them to do to improve security within the kernel without breaking that backwards compatibility. Is it perfect? No, nothing is. Is it kind of the best value of checks and balances and waiting that they could do? I think that's probably true. So that's kind of issue number one, right? They're limited by 40, 50 years, can't be 50, 40 years of customers at this point driving what is considered acceptability by them to determine what Microsoft can do. So that's part one. Part two, let's say Microsoft says, we're going to put checks and balances in place and testing in place to test all of the updates that are done to anything that touches this level of the kernel ring 0 or kernel ring -1. Great. Now Microsoft is responsible for any delays that occur in any security software that gets released for these platforms. What do you think acceptability of the market is for that attitude? There's an attack, it's virulent. CrowdStrike releases an update. Microsoft is now the holdup. In the meantime, there's a new worm going around that's infecting organizations. Right. So Microsoft can't do that.
It sounds really lose-lose to me.
It's the right. Lose one, lose two. All right. So here's the third one. Microsoft says no one else can exist in that ring. However, malicious code still attempts to attack it. And Microsoft themselves can put Defender in that ring because Microsoft makes Defender. Now they've violated antitrust laws. Those are just the three. Let's just take those. Those are kind of the big three. None of those are things Microsoft can change. Therefore, there is in no way that this is a Microsoft problem.
I think it's interesting because if you go right back to the 90s and before, they bent over. App compat was the horrible Microsoft phrase. It was Microsoft started with a deliberate let's make our platform as open for as much as possible and backwards compatible for as much as possible. And that was how Microsoft got so popular in a lot of ways. So it was a fantastic business strategy, but then it's left them kind of stuck, as you say, to you can't go back on app compat. That's a bad.
You cannot. And if you look at so Apple's done it twice, right? When they converted from PowerPC to Intel, they built a compatibility layer that they kept around for a while. But their ecosystem compared to Microsoft's was, I don't know, 1%, 0.5%, 0.1%. And then they did it again, going from Intel to Apple Silicon. Again, right? When you look at the size of the ecosystem, they don't even remotely compare. Right? Look at the size of the ecosystem of Linux. It doesn't even remotely compare.
Which is also, if CrowdStrike had kind of failed for Apple users,
it would have barely been the news.
It wouldn't have been. It would have been in the tech news,
right? It would have been something we all talked about, but I don't think CNN would have done an article. I don't think every major news organization would have done a thing about it. I don't think it would have raised to the level that it's at by any means, because critical systems likely would still be up, right? Yes, you'd have had a bunch of tech people going, "Why did my Mac fail today?" Right, but not as many as you would think, and also not as many as are there today, right? Not as many as the 24,000 organizations that run the core of their business on CrowdStrike and Windows.
Right. I have two questions. The first is, John, you mentioned something about cheese, specifically Swiss cheese.
I know you
as a lover of cheese, and I know more about cheese than I do cars or tech. What was that about first?
Oh.
Do
you use that analogy, John? The Swiss cheese analogy for security?
Yeah.
Want me to explain it?
Hit it.
So the concept of security falls into defense in depth, right? Which is to say, I have multiple layers of defense that provide a cohesive defense around my data, my data estate, or my compute estate, right? So that the idea is every single one of those layers has holes and flaws. They have blind spots. They have things they don't protect against. But if the next layer doesn't have all of those holes, and then layer after that and the layer after that, what you get is you don't have holes, you have bubbles, and the whole thing is solid, just like Swiss cheese. If I take a slice of Swiss cheese, every slice has a bunch of holes. But those holes don't line up throughout the whole block. And therefore, I have security as long as I have that defense in depth, as long as I have all those layers of Swiss cheese. And that's really what we're trying to accomplish with security, right? So EDR is one piece of that, but it is not the totality. You can't just have EDR and no other security, in the same way that you can't have a firewall and no other security, or
I think that
any piece of security.
The reason I wanted to bring the analogy in as well was 100%. That's it. It's not just about technology. It's also about process, but it's also about politics. It's also about vendor trust, and all the different. So if one single thing was different in this situation, this might not have happened. For example, if CrowdStrike was less trusted, and therefore, or if CrowdStrike's testing was better, or if et cetera, it's just all the things went wrong at once. And this
perfect storm.
This looks like it was a small patch. Content was mentioned. I'm not sure if that's true, but it looks like it wasn't. It wasn't seen as a kind of high risk security patch, so it kind of went in under everyone's radar at a high level, if that makes sense. It was like a very small nuclear warhead that was seen as a something that didn't matter very much.
Sure, it's a suitcase bomb, right? Nobody looks for a suitcase nuke because it's a little suitcase, but when it goes off, you certainly are aware of it.
Exactly. So you didn't tell me you put a suitcase bomb in the button. It's one of those.
So let's talk about that for a second, because I think that exposes something really interesting, which is it's not the first time this has happened. Something similar happened in 2010, where McAfee pushed an update and caused a major global outage.
I mean, who was the CTO at that time then, Howard?
Yes. So that should have been, and it happened for very much the same reason, right? A lack of quality control, a lack of proper process, push to production, major outage. So the CTO of McAfee at the time is the current CEO of CrowdStrike. Same person.
Oh no.
Yep. So this is the second time that George has been at a high level involved, and today fully responsible as the CEO for a major outage caused by effectively the same thing.
That was a plot twist I wasn't actually prepared for. I was like, wait, was Howard a CTO at? I thought he was ripping you. That's wild.
Well, it's not wild. It's dangerous. It's damaging,
right? Because
what it says is there was a lack of learning from that incident.
So, I guess what I want to know is what happens next, right? Is CrowdStrike going to survive this? Are they going to be able to continue on? Will they be able to maintain customer trust? Will this impact Microsoft? Because despite everything you've listed, I think the majority of people, blame the messenger. And the messenger of this issue was absolutely Microsoft, right? So what is this going to mean for the landscape of these companies going forward?
Okay, well, let's just take a look.
I didn't do that.
Howard seems to have frozen. So I'll keep speaking. So let's just take a look at. I think it's really. I'd separate CrowdStrike from Microsoft again. I mean, there's almost historically there's the Microsoft tax. People aren't going to pull away from the Microsoft platform for one simple reason: they can't. So one way or another, people aren't going to go, oh crap, I'm going to use Linux now. That's not going to happen. And equally, there's a massive investment in CrowdStrike products by CrowdStrike customers. But CrowdStrike is a product running on top of the Windows platform and other platforms. And it's probably not the only product. So if you were not a CrowdStrike customer and you were putting an RFP out looking for an EDR solution, just a detection and response solution, you're faced with two things. One is, does this solution functionally give me what I want? CrowdStrike? Sure. The other is, do I want to be the person that's brought in CrowdStrike into my organization within 3 months of this happening? So there's
Maybe.
that whole politics going on there. So
well, maybe I want to be the person that brings them in. So I don't know what you guys missed. I'll just repeat what I was saying. Right, CrowdStrike stock is down 25% since last week. In the last,
is it back up a bit?
I just looked at it. It's down 23 point blah 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 percent.
Okay, it's bounced a little.
Yeah. It did hit lower than that, but it did recover. Microsoft's, however, is effectively untouched. Like right now, it is 446.51. The high from 5 days ago looks like it's 444.53. So they're actually higher than the high from 5 days ago, right? So yes, they took a dip. 432.94 was their low. But overall, Microsoft's recovered, thankfully, because again, not Microsoft's fault. Right? I also want to say, not your IT team's fault. At all, to 0% was it their fault. CrowdStrike does not give you the ability to stage rollout of definitions. Let me repeat. CrowdStrike does not give you the ability to stage the rollout of definitions. There is no way for your IT team to have tested this and caught it themselves. CrowdStrike does not give you that ability. There is no best practice that was violated by your IT team. That being said, I think we're going to have a whole series of new best practices. So let me explain one of the things that happened throughout this that caused some of the delay in recovery. So modern Windows operating systems, just like all modern operating systems, ideally encrypt the volumes that they rest on. That is a security measure, so that if the hard drive is stolen, you can't read the data on the hard drive or the disk image without the encryption key to decrypt the encryption. Does that make logical sense? Okay. For Windows, that is called BitLocker. And in an enterprise, you save your BitLocker keys. You export them and save them somewhere. There's an easy SQL database to save them in. This is not problematic. This is standard practice. But now I have a SQL server with all my BitLocker keys in it. To protect my SQL server, I do the needful and I deploy CrowdStrike on it along with everything else in my environment. So to recover BitLocker from all the systems, the same server has the same problem that's holding all my BitLocker keys. See where the problem
where this is going, don't you?
Right? So in order to recover that, I have to restore it from backup. Well, my backup server is running the same Windows and CrowdStrike combination that caused the problem. In order to decrypt that, I need to get to the BitLocker keys that are stored in the database. In order to get to that database, I have to restore the database. All right, so the solution for that is to deploy a brand new Windows operating system and stand SQL back up. It's not onerous. That is something that we have done in the past. We know how to do that. It just takes hours to do. Right? I have to deploy the new OS. I have to attach the database to it. I have to power the database back on, blah, 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 blah. Same for backup, right? If I want to recover my backup first, well, I have to create a whole new backup server. I have to attach the backup software to, I have to install the backup software. I then have to attach to my backup repository and I have to start my restores, adding hours to what should have been moments. Right? Now I can get to my BitLocker keys. Now I can share my BitLocker keys. Now the recovery tools will work.
Now I can start updating 10,000
but it's
servers.
It's a blue screen, so now I have to touch everything. If I have remote kind of virtual KVM, which is keyboard, video, mouse, right? Remote command and control, I can use my remote command and control. I don't have that for everything. And therefore, it's a manual process to some degree. CrowdStrike was great in releasing tools, doesn't change the fact that they caused the whole problem, so I don't really give them any credit for the tools. They did everything they could, but they caused a problem that was incredibly onerous. And again, George was at the helm when they caused the last one in 2010. Now they've caused the second one in 2024. It's been 14 years, great, but it's only happened twice, and George was involved in both of them. It's not happened 3 times where he wasn't involved in one. We as an industry must expect the people that run these companies to learn from their mistakes and ensure us that they will not happen again. So I think there's 2 things that need to happen. I think as IT teams, you need to treat your backup infrastructure as the nuclear fail-safe codes, separate infrastructure, separate stack, separate list of vulnerabilities managed separately. Had you been running anybody else, frankly, other than CrowdStrike, if you'd just been running Windows Defender Enterprise on your backup infrastructure, it wouldn't have been corrupted at the same time all your CrowdStrike stuff was. Recovery would have been significantly faster.
It sounds like a term Chris Grundeman taught me. It sounds like broccoli. It's not fun to do. You don't want to do it, but for your good and health, you need to.
It's expensive.
I love broccoli. It's like my favorite vegetable.
It's a really, really good phrase.
It's a great phrase. Brussels sprouts, but let's call it Brussels sprouts.
All right, the Brussels sprouts of
they're nasty
security.
little cabbages, but they're good for you.
Funnily enough,
so yes, I tend to agree. Please, anyone that listens to it, don't cherry pick what I just said and then use that to blame IT. IT follow best practices. Running multiple security suites is a problem that increases complexity. It is not best practice. It is not considered best practice. I think it now should be. Now, today, 3 days after this incident occurred, 4 days after this incident occurred, right? Please don't blame your IT department. They did nothing wrong. However, it does show that there's room for improvement, and this would be my suggestion to improve. Sorry, John.
No. I'm on Brussels sprouts still, and thinking about when to get our daughter to eat them, we gave her £1 for every Brussels sprout she ate, and she ate 5 Brussels sprouts, and that was enough. I was like, okay, you got this now. But these are expensive Brussels sprouts. I'm slightly more ambivalent, I think, about the doing nothing wrong thing, because I'm thinking about it from the security perspective. But what you said was that they had no choice but to install this. This was an automated patch that came with the contract. So part of me is going, how did we allow this to happen where the security company had control over what ran on our servers? But I get it.
Well, and flip it for a minute, right? We're coming up to the end of our time, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but flip it for a minute. I have CrowdStrike. I get infected. My board immediately goes, we're going to lynch someone. Security goes, we had CrowdStrike. They're the leader. Here's all of the kind of magic quadrant-y things that show CrowdStrike as the leader. I did the best that I could. CrowdStrike does their investigation and goes, yeah, but this was a 0 day. We had released the patch for it, but your internal process takes 7, 10, 20 days to get approval. You weren't running the latest definitions.
Yeah.
So we're not going to give you any certification on investigation and remediation unless this is automated. And the board goes, yeah, it should be automated, no doubt.
So, and I think
the logic to get there is not out of bounds, right?
I think,
and I don't think that should change. Like I don't think that's the place that we need to say that needs to change. I think we need to think about it more logically and just go, this becomes this kind of vendor lock-in becomes a single point of failure, and we should probably mitigate it from that perspective.
You wrote about, as we run out of time, as you say, but liability on this, because that's saying, well, the IT department would be liable in that circumstance because CrowdStrike could wash their hands of it. Does this situation mean that there's going to be some, I don't know, class action?
I think it's going to be insane if there's not lawsuits. Like, I think it would be crazy if there's not lawsuits. Effectively, I'm a big fan of, if you take away the right, then you accept the responsibility. Right? CrowdStrike removed the right of people to test and deploy their own definitions, and therefore I think they hold the responsibility for that. Whether that translates into legal liability is for the courts to decide. I am not an attorney. I'm not giving legal advice. However, I think it would be insane if we don't start seeing lawsuits against CrowdStrike. Personally, I think it's going to be insane if the board of directors at CrowdStrike isn't already having conversations about who needs to be replaced.
Mm-hmm.
Testing is a fundamental requirement. This level of failure should never have occurred. If they only fire the person at the end of the chain, this speaks to a rot within CrowdStrike where executives get away without taking responsibility. An executive needs to go, whoever is responsible for this. I don't know who that is. It's easy to point the finger at George, but as CEO, I can't imagine that he's that involved in the day-to-day processes where he set up that process. It still happened under his watch. He still has responsibility for it. I am not by any means calling for the head of George or any other specific executive, but something has to change. And we as an industry have to have, we need these companies to have third-party certification that they're following best practices in managing the supply chain up to and including the things they produce themselves.
Yeah. I mean, and this does come back to what Johnny was saying about, are we ever going to trust them again? Trust is one of those things that you give it away the first time, and then if you lose it, you have to, it's very expensive to earn it back.
We need to do an episode on trust because trust hasn't evolved since we lived in caves. We now live in a digital age. We ascribe trust to corporations. Corporations are not people. They do not deserve our trust. Fundamentally, trust is between one person to another and has been for hundreds of thousands of years. Where we get into trouble is we trust and don't racism fundamentally is a lack of trust in an entire people based on some false assumption. Why don't we do the same thing with corporations? That's weird. We continue to do it with people, which is wrong, yet we fail to do it with corporations, which is also wrong.
Which is
my mere presence is enough to radicalize Howard. So
I get mad about trusting an impression that is completely and utterly wrong when it comes to a group of people, and yet at the same time, we for some reason trust corporations whose by very nature is to make money. There's no other reason they exist.
They're a machine to make money, not a person.
That is correct. So we need to think about what does trust mean within the context of a relationship between you and an entity, not a person, designed to create wealth. It seems strange to me. Anyhow, that's a topic for a different day. On that note, on that very divisive end, we will leave you. This has been another episode of The Good, The Bad, and The Techy. Look, guys, this is tough. If anyone needs help, please reach out. Comment, like, subscribe, share. Reach out if you have questions. Reach out if you don't know how to address a particular issue inside your organization. We are happy to help. That's what we're here for. I'm Howard Holton. Thank you.
I'm Jon Collins, and you are?
I'm Johnny. These two will be back next time. Until then, thank you so much for joining us. Again, you can find us at gigaohm.com. You can find these guys on LinkedIn. I really encourage you to reach out to them. If you have a subject you want them to talk on, please let us know. We come in every week and we kind of figure out what we want to talk about, but we would love to hear what you want to hear about. So please reach out to us. We're all sociable people, and we will return next